What's up, everyone? My name's Abhi, and welcome to the very first Slice of Pai podcast. I'm starting things off with a bang with the one and only Neel Kolhatkar. Hey, Neel, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Abby, thanks for having me in Kellyville. Oh, am I allowed to say this suburb this is
Yeah, Kellyville's
recording?
fine. Kellyville's
Gee, there's
fine.
so many roundabouts to get here.
Yeah,
That's
you're
insane.
you're coming from out.
Sort of inner west, outer inner west,
Yeah.
Strathfield area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's technically still. Apparently, the inner west goes up to Parramatta now,
Does
which
it?
is just ridiculous.
So, where do you go to school?
I went to school in the Shire.
Yeah, like close by here then.
No, the Shire. So near Cronulla.
Oh, okay. Because we also have a shire which is out this way.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Is that the Hawkesbury Shire or
No,
is
it's
that
more like Borkham Hills.
Borkham Hill? Yeah.
Yeah.
What a Shire? What does Shire actually mean? Does it just mean there's some sort of water
It just
body of
reminds
water
me of
nearby?
Lord of the Rings. I don't know.
That's what a lot of people say. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Shire pride with people down south, and I always made a joke that when Lord of the Rings would mention the Shire, they'd be
Mhm.
like, "Yeah, that's where I'm fucking from, mate."
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So you don't want them at the premiere, right?
Yeah, so where'd you go to primary school and then high school?
I went to primary school Hurstville South, which is St George area,
Yeah.
not the Shire. Everyone mixes those two up.
Uh-huh.
They hate each other, and the St George area is better. Big call, but it is, and very multicultural. Hurstville in particular, a lot of Hong Kong expats, and then I went to high school in Caringbah, which is just near Cronulla, so a bit different, a lot whiter,
Yeah,
a lot more beachy.
yeah. I think I remember on the podcast you mentioned it was a selective.
Yeah, selective school.
That's rare to find a selective school with a lot more white people. Well,
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the few selective schools that even then still had probably even now had a majority white people.
Yeah, because I
Which is
went to
rare.
Girraween High School, which is
Oh,
also
okay.
selective, but it was like 80% Asian.
Yeah, and even that's a small percentage
Mm,
for the selective schools in Sydney. You're usually looking at about 90, 95,
yeah,
whereas Caringbah was about 40. It's weird. They always do those demographic reports about the amount of Asians in selective schools
mm-hmm,
in the Sydney Morning Herald and,
yeah,
and the Australian. And I don't know, it's just a strange thing. Look at the demographics of that. They should do the demographics of sports high schools. It's
yeah.
probably all Islanders.
We're going to circle back to that
Uh-huh.
about the whole Asian background being very prevalent in high school and academics.
Yeah.
Because in the States, you know how they're in colleges actually handicapped for like entering, and they give like privilege
That's true.
to like black
That's
and other
true now.
minorities, but
Yeah.
Asians get like brought down because they get in so much.
Yes, because there are minimum quotas for each ethnic group,
Hmm.
and Asians usually outperform many of the other ethnic groups. So the mark to get in for an Asian is actually a lot higher
Yeah.
than even a white person.
Yeah,
So it's positive discrimination for blacks and Latinos, but negative discrimination, particularly towards Asians.
Mhm.
It's a strange one. It's let's be racist towards Asians to alleviate racism against blacks.
yeah, yeah,
It's a strange one.
yeah. Definitely. That also is going to tie into what we're going to be talking about in terms of Actually, we'll circle back to that. Let's start with comedy.
Okay.
What do you think is the state of comedy these days?
The state of comedy.
Yeah.
Well, like the state of stand-up comedy, or
Stand up, yeah, specifically because it's very unfiltered.
I mean, it's been transformed by all the new technology that's come about, namely Netflix, the internet. There's less of an emphasis of working your way through the amateur clubs, becoming a headliner, maybe getting a TV spot. There used to be talk shows. That was a big outlet for comedians to make it big, and movies and those sorts of avenues. They still exist, but they're not the only avenue anymore. So it's in a bit of a state of flux almost. There's all sorts of different ways stand-up comedians can make a name for themselves. It's exciting. I kind of like that. I kind of like that there's new territory to be explored. But in terms of the culture around stand-up comedy,
Mhm.
well, that's a big question.
Let's start with woke culture,
Yeah, well, okay, woke culture. That's
cancel culture.
cancel culture, woke culture. That sort of general uh, ideology. Sure, I think ultimately it's a hindrance to the creativity of stand-up comedians.
Freedom of speech as well.
Yeah. I think it probably started as a good thing. If there were comedians that were just making dumb jokes that were purely just to put down a minority or another group,
Hmm.
even though I think they should be legally allowed to do that. But there's something to be said about social taboos, and the
Hmm.
industry was quite protective, especially not just comedy, but the arts industry in general would tend to be on the left side of culture and be protective for, I suppose, minority voices. But then it got completely bastardized, and it's gone to an extent where any joke that's deemed offensive or inappropriate to any group out there, the comedy itself is then considered bad comedy, and it's a weird situation. There's always been taboos for comedians to navigate, and this is just the current version of that. And it's just very prevalent and pervasive, and it can be quite um, encumbering, cumbersome. Sorry, I should say,
Hmm.
for many stand-up comedians, especially ones that do tend to push the boundaries. I know there's also the argument that a lot of comedians who are just offensive will say, "I just push the boundaries." Well, you can push the boundaries. You can be provocative but still be clever. And if you're just being offensive for the sake of being offensive, again, I think that should be legally permissible, and also, I guess, culturally permissible in the arts world. But there's something to be said about the nuances um, in the different in the sort of different pushbacks against that woke ideology, because there are a lot of people who will have that similar view if it's gone too far, but some will have it for a better reason than others, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's just like Ricky Gervais says, just because you're offended doesn't mean you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
And
That's
basically, it's
exactly
all a
it.
matter of perspective at the end of the day.
That's exactly it. I do understand that there is if you believe in freedom of speech, people are allowed to say I'm offended, and
Hmm.
they're allowed to get on Twitter and say I didn't like that joke. So
Hmm.
comedians can't be too precious about it.
Of course.
But when it comes to private companies and big platforms such as Netflix or even TV and radio, whatever it may be, deplatforming comedians
Hmm.
because a minority, but a vocal minority, found a joke or a skit offensive, that's something I fervently disagree with.
Hmm.
And I think I have a suspicion that in another 2 or 3 years there'll almost be this reverse cancel culture where suddenly all these people who are against original cancel culture they'll just play out the same tactics, but they'll create this conglomerate of thousands, maybe millions of people who then pressure companies who have cancelled a comedian,
Hmm.
bring them back, or
I,
we will
I think that's
boycott that company,
I think that
which
started
is,
happening as
it's
well.
already
Yeah, it
starting to
started
happen.
happening.
And I don't know if that's really the right way to combat it, but it was an inevitable consequence, I
Mm.
think. And corporations just care about money at the end of the day.
Hmm.
They pretend that they're ethical. They have this veneer of social justice and virtue, but at the end of the day, they want profit. And if there is enough public pressure, they'll always cave.
Yeah.
So, be interesting to see if there is almost a reverse cancel culture that occurs. There's a few instances of that already sort of happening,
Yeah.
but not to the extent that it's happening the other way.
Yeah. Would you say that a lot of the cancel culture, the underlying ideology, is Marxist?
Look, I'm not very well versed in political science, but the predominant Marxist narrative of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie, uh, you can see some similarities to that in the the privileged white male, the oppressor group, and
Hmm.
the oppressed group.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't just say it's Marxist, but it has similar themes.
Exactly.
I would
That's what
say
I
that.
mean. The underlying
Yeah.
concept of basically reversing and basically bringing everything down to a level playing field, destroying the hierarchy.
Well, that there's just this inherent power struggle
Yeah.
that needs to occur. So there are definitely, uh, there's a likeness to Marxist theory.
Yeah.
But I'm not an expert on Marxist theory. I've read
Yeah.
the Communist Manifesto. And I know the basic gist of it, but I'm not a scholar by any means.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Netflix before, Isaac Butterfield,
Mm-hmm.
he was, I think I remember he was about to have a Netflix special with him, but then they cancelled him because of a joke he made. And that plays into exactly what you were just talking about before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great example of it. Yeah.
Being in comedy, who were your inspirations to get into comedy?
Chris Rock, 100%. Chris Rock is my number one. Love the guy. I think he's a genius. Absolutely love all his major specials, and just he has this really. It's beautiful the way he can articulate unspoken truths in such a vivacious and entertaining way, an exuberant way that can appeal to every demographic. At face value, this guy's so funny. Look at him, he's so outrageous. But then if you look at the underlying ideas that he's espousing, it's genius. So I absolutely love Chris Rock. He is the reason I got into stand-up comedy. And a close second would be Russell Peters, like any Indian, as you would know.
I was just about to say, like you're both Indian, westernized comedians who are both also really good with impressions. So you also have that.
Yes, a lot of people would say, hey, you're Russell Peters, next Russell Peters, and things like that. And when I started, I did sort of emulate his style. As a lot of comedians coming up, you can see who their influences are. But then again, there's nothing. A lot of comedians do impressions, and it's just true. His perspective, which was a very unique one, and he does not get enough credit in the comedy industry. What he did, he brought stand-up comedy to, and I'm not exaggerating, billions of people.
Yeah,
I'm not exaggerating. No one in India knew what stand-up comedy was basically till 2010. I mean, I'm sure people did, but the vast majority of people had no idea what it was. Russell Peters is the reason the entire subcontinent, the entirety of the Middle East knows what stand-up comedy is, and the disrespect he gets, not the disrespect, but the lack of
appreciation.
The lack of adoration that he gets, because the stand-up comedy scene can be quite purist, and they can just get so caught up in their little bubble of, idealistic stand-up comedy. It's almost like a political mindset of, I guess I'm just immediately thinking of libertarians who just get so caught up in, we shouldn't be legislating seatbelts. No one's going to vote for you if you just talk about these little tiny things that no one cares about just to be a purist. There's similar, I'd say it's a weird connection, but I think in stand-up comedy, there are all these purists who just do not like anyone who tries something a little bit different, goes through a different avenue of making it. And nowadays, that's how everyone's making a name for themselves. I guess now Netflix has become the mainstream route to still become a famous comedian. But Andrew Schultz has shown that you don't. Well, he's on Netflix now, but he didn't progress through that usual ladder. He created his own path.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites too. He actually did this really good podcast with Jordan Peterson very recently.
I saw that. Well, I saw half of that.
Yeah, it was great. They're both very intelligent people.
Such a strange crossover. I would not have expected Jordan Peterson to be on a podcast with Andrew Schultz. But there you
worlds
go.
colliding.
There you go. And good on him for doing that, because I think more people in mainstream pop culture, if you will, but entertainment should be open to someone like Jordan Peterson, because he gets so much controversy. And it's unclear why. Because you're allowed to be a prominent intellectual voice without everyone agreeing with everything you say. Yes, there are a lot of people who just take him as some sort of god, but he really hit a nerve. There was clearly a void in the intellectual marketplace, and he filled that. Unlike anyone else. And I don't agree with everything he says, but he's been such a major influence on the way I live my life and my outlook on life and just what I value. And
I think he's literally changed my life. So I can't understate that.
He's changed a lot of people's lives. He's probably changed millions of people's lives.
What would you say were the biggest things you took away from him?
When I first saw him, I thought, wow, here's someone who is a renowned, he wasn't famous yet in his own right, but he was a proper intellectual, a professor, who's coming out and criticizing what people would now call the woke left. And I thought, finally, someone who is intellectually able to find the holes in this ideology and properly criticize it, because for so long there was this groupthink where, the only people who would be against these new cultural norms are uneducated and they're stupid and they are ignorant. Well, here's someone who's extremely intelligent, who's able to criticize it in a very intellectual way. And everyone thought, finally, this is the man who's been able to articulate what we've all been thinking in such a beautiful way.
Yeah.
And that's what originally got me interested in him. And he just has such... Well, a lot of them are just classic ideas about self-help and personal responsibility. But he's right in saying that for a lot of younger people, especially men, they haven't been told that. They've grown up on a lot of pop culture and, I don't know, hip-hop and reality TV, and they haven't had someone like that to actually say, no, it's not about just becoming famous and rich and getting as many girls as you can.
Yeah.
Take some damn responsibility. Find something virtuous to do in your life and suffer for a cause.
Yeah, I would say that the 4 biggest things I took away from him would be, he always says, aim for the highest possible good you can conceive of. Then he also says, carry the heaviest possible burden you can bear.
Yeah.
So I think that giving people that goal and that direction will make the world a better place if everyone kind of adheres to that. It'll just happen naturally. And the other thing I learned from him, which really helped change my life, is don't cast pearls before swine.
I haven't actually heard that quote.
It's a biblical expression, but what it basically means is if you're offering something to someone and it's not being accepted or appreciated, then you have no obligation to stay there. You should offer it to someone else.
Yeah. Well, a lot of this self-help and religious teaching is they're simple adages, but they're very hard to fully enact in practice. That's the challenge. Something like clean your room, well, obviously. But what he means by that's a metaphor. Look for the flaws within yourself before you start pointing out the flaws at the world.
Exactly.
That's what it really means.
Exactly.
And people who maybe aren't as, I think, just not that intelligent, think it's literally, okay, I just need to clean my room. Is that your grand advice? No, it's not as simple as that.
It's who you become in the process of cleaning your room, being able to discern what's important, sorting order from chaos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Figure out, become the best version of yourself before you try and talk about what the best version of the world could be. Now, there's a limit to that sort of ideology. I mean, if you are there's something to be said about collective disobedience and more left-wing political ideas that I've actually, as I've gotten older, I've become a bit more attuned to. But they both have their place. I think as an individual, you should strive to be the best version of yourself. And to take another biblical idea, those in glass houses
shouldn't throw stones.
Exactly. Yeah. So make sure your house is in order before you cast the first stone.
Exactly.
If you're even going to cast stones.
Because the other thing is, it's easier to blame everyone else than yourself. So that's why people do it. It's an easier path, the path of least resistance.
Absolutely. Our ego is inclined to take that path because the alternative is to accept the fact that you either weren't good enough or someone else was better than you, or there's things that you could have done better. Whereas it's far more comforting to just say, no, there was no fault of mine. It was my circumstances. It was the world.
Yeah. Speaking of becoming...
political ideology, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Speaking of becoming your best self, one of the other coolest concepts that I've ever learned, also I learned from Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Carl Jung's concept of the self. Have you heard about that?
Vaguely, but again, I'm not an expert on it.
Okay. It's literally the coolest idea I've heard. So basically, you know how certain things draw your attention? They just grip your attention, right?
Yeah.
So basically, the mechanism that draws your attention in the present is your future better self beckoning through to you through the past to follow the path that will lead you to self-actualization. So basically, you should follow your intuition because that's your
Interesting.
future self telling you.
Say that again.
From which part? From the beginning?
Just the self.
So your future self is beckoning to you backwards through time to follow a certain path by gripping your attention. And if you follow that, you will become the best version of yourself.
Okay. But what if it's pushing towards alcoholism or something like that?
Well, basically, you set an ideal, right? And then the process of going towards that ideal, you'll change as a person, and your vision will get better, and you'll recalibrate to a better goal.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. I don't know a lot about that side of Jungian thought. I know a bit more about his collective unconscious and those sorts of ideas. But
what do you mean by collective unconscious?
Other than there's just this general universal subconscious knowledge that all humans have, and that's why we see certain archetypes that pop up in various cultures across the world within their stories and myths and legends, and that there are similar ideals that are just not born out of cultural conditioning, but just an intrinsic urge we have.
It's almost biological, right?
Yeah, that it basically
the hero's journey.
Biological to adhere to certain ideals, and that's the broad concept of what he's talking about there. I've read a little bit. I'm not a scholar on it, but
I've just listened to basically all of his podcasts, so it's all thanks to Jordan Peterson. But basically, what he's taught me is it is biological because in the process of the hero's journey, it's also a dominance hierarchy thing, right? So as you become the best version of yourself, you become competent, and then as you rise to the top, then that also helps with sexual selection and all of that. So it's biological. It's like the hypothalamus. So that's why we have that intrinsic drive, I think.
Yeah.
It's I don't know if it's a far off concept or not.
No. I generally tend to agree.
Yeah. Speaking of dominance hierarchies, actually, we'll circle back to this because we'll be talking about relationships.
Okay.
At some point.
My favorite.
Yeah, I know. Speaking of that, your podcast with Eliza is Sex Sells. If you haven't seen it yet, or listened to it, I should say, definitely check it out. I'll put links in the description below. But yeah, it's a great podcast. It's very insightful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Eliza, I think, is probably one of the most empathetic people I've ever heard.
She is
almost to a fault.
I don't know about that, but she's very, very empathetic.
I know, but
kind.
She's very kind. But what I mean by that is some of the situations she's spoken about, like I know lesser people wouldn't have put up with the kind of shit that she has.
In that sense, sure, you could argue that it may be a hindrance in her general well-being, but I think, as you were saying, I think her ideal is to care for people, so she's willing to suffer for that.
I know, that's very admirable.
Yeah.
You know, suffering is inherent to finding meaning, right? And when you have that meaning, then you don't really feel the suffering. It justifies the suffering.
Yeah, definitely can be. You just got to make sure you find the right meaning.
Exactly.
And that's sometimes tricky because you can be sucked into all sorts of cults and unhealthy ideas. And the thing is, if you're in a cult, you wouldn't think that you're in a cult.
Exactly.
You think that you know the truth. So you need some form of group social pressure to keep you grounded, to keep you on the right path. But then again, if the group is corrupt, then you need a bigger group. You need the civilization to come together and actually pressure people and mold people into the appropriate person. But then you also need individuality. Yeah, look, at the end of the day, it's all a very delicate tightrope between individuality, but also group pressure. Group consciousness. The group collective consciousness society, that would be the superego, right? Your ego is calibrating between the id and the superego, right? Yeah. That's Freudian ideas, right? Yeah. Is the superego just based on the group consciousness, or is it your higher ideals? Although your higher ideals are probably influenced by the promulgation of the group ideals. So yes, I think you're correct there.
So Russell Peters, we were mentioning him before we move on. He's also got a new podcast called Culturally Cancelled.
Really?
Yeah. So yeah.
What does he talk about?
He interviews people and like other comedians and stuff. So it ranges, kind of the same concept I'm having with this podcast.
I wonder, because now he might even be called racist because of his impressions.
Yeah.
And I wonder, because he sits in this weird world where he probably has the most diverse audience of any comedian globally.
Mm-hmm.
But I suppose the Western intelligentsia wouldn't like him.
Yeah. What makes you say that?
Because it's racial impressions and it's based on stereotypes, even though that is what appeals if it's done in an affable and just a good way. If it's done well, if it's sort of if you're finding the humor in various groups in an effective way, that appeals to those groups more than anything.
Exactly.
It's not offensive.
Exactly. They like that you relate to them.
Exactly. There's some insecure people that find it offensive, but they're not the voice for the group.
Yeah.
The voice are the people who are buying tickets en masse to see someone like Russell Peters.
Exactly. He also just passed 1 million subscribers on YouTube just yesterday or today. So.
Okay, that's interesting. I haven't really been looking at his work more recently, so I'll have to check out that podcast.
Yeah.
What does he talk? When a name like culturally cancelled, I suppose, what's he trying to get at with that?
I'm not sure exactly.
Has the brown community turned against him now? Or?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
He's still one of the most famous comedians I know in the Indian circle. I can't remember which special of his it was. It came out about, it was when I was in high school, but it was somebody gonna get hurt real bad.
Yeah, so that was just.
Yeah, that circulated through my whole school
before before YouTube.
Yeah,
just as YouTube came about.
Yeah, basically.
That circulated through my high school as well. It was massive.
Yeah, I still quote that one to this day. His impressions are good. If I try to do it, I'll probably get cancelled. But the please do not yell in the casino. Relay.
Classic. Yeah, that was a great special. What happened was, if you then were a brown comedian that did any sort of accents, he's just trying to be Russell Peters. Well, come on, like impressions and accents aren't unique to just Russell Peters. It was almost, you get the sense that a lot of brown comedians who were in that purist stand-up bubble almost thought it was, well, they'll use a term like internalized racism if you're even just impersonating Indians, and it's somehow devaluing and disrespecting brown culture. I think this is just really precious at the end of the day and pedantic.
Yeah.
I mean, someone who's comfortable in their culture is able to satirize it.
Exactly.
Whereas someone who's insecure about themselves and their culture sees it as this
attack on them.
Yeah, sees everything as an attack and sees it as this disrespect and almost this kind of pernicious devaluation of that culture. When actually, no, it's a way to, it's an endearing form of connection.
Yeah.
When you're able to
speak to them,
connect with a certain group of people, and make observations that are accurate and funny.
Yeah.
So they're the ones with internalized racism in many ways. They're very insecure about who they are. And that's why they try and protect themselves from any sort of satire or humor about their culture or their race.
Yeah.
Which is funny because they'll tell other people they have internalized racism, but it's very clear they're the ones who have it.
Yeah, there's this thing that Morgan Freeman said, which it's a bit generalized. It's more of a nuanced approach, but he said the way to get rid of racism is to stop talking about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very simple sentiment.
Too simple, but I get what he's saying.
I do get what he's saying, although it's always going to be very obvious that different races, especially when we talk about cultural differences. There will be different groups, and they will, on average, act uniquely, and people will make those observations, and they will stereotype, and things like discrimination. These things are unfortunately always going to exist.
Mm-hmm.
We need to ensure that a country or a nation state isn't legally discriminating or politically discriminating against any group of people. And then there's so much nuance to something like that.
Mm-hmm.
If racism does exist, you should talk about it. But what you need to define is what racism is, because right now people have all sorts of different ideas of what racism actually means, because this the progressive side of culture has just changed the word, changed the definition. It's no longer prejudice against someone because of their ethnicity. It's using your power to oppress someone because of their ethnicity. So by that definition, and when they say power, they talk about collective economic power.
Mm-hmm.
So on average, a white person has power. Even though there's plenty of poor white people out there, but a white person has power, so only they can be a brown person can be raised to a black person, but a black person can't be raised to a brown. It's quite cunning that they've sort of just out of nowhere, really. I don't know when this change of the definition occurred, but you can't just do that. You can't just change what a word means.
Yeah,
to fit your ideology.
That's exactly what the radical left is doing right now. Yeah, you talked about moving from the left. I think I had a similar journey. Was yours about 3-4 years ago when you started making that shift?
Well, I think, as someone who I did the other podcast with Jordan says, I think these terms left, right, I mean, I'll use the word woke a lot. These can be very reductive, and there's a lot of diversity of thought within the left side of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
And it's probably not just a line. There's that square,
It's a spectrum.
that political compass, but it's probably even more complex than that.
Mm.
When I started questioning the common cultural ideas of the day was, well, I think just being in the arts industry, because that's where you see the bastardized version of it. You see the most extreme version of it with heavily policed quotas and government funding, and you have to appease the oligarchy of Australian arts funding to get anywhere in this country. But then the internet changed that, which was something from the free market.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, there's more complexity to something like that. But that's what's helped me the most. The ingenuity of the free market, the ability to not have to appease gatekeepers and the established order of what things are. So that's when I started to think a bit more deeply about those ideas. And I always like free reign to any sort of discourse and exploring ideas to the greatest depth possible, and figuring out every facet, every argument, the nuances here and there, and the people that tended to be stifling the debate, at least in my young life, which I know historically wasn't the case, but it was people on the left side of the political spectrum. And so I turned against that. There's nothing here for me. If I need to constantly police my language and worry about someone having a meltdown because they learn about the truth of history, I don't want to converse with someone like that. I think they probably need psychological. I used to think, they're all snowflakes and they're weak, but no, I just think they genuinely need a bit of psychological help more than anything. And I think it doesn't help the cause if people are constantly lambasting them with insults about how fragile they are. Yeah. I think we need to actually care for some of these people, and maybe there needs to be different tiers of intellectual discourse. If you can't handle certain ideas and truths about history or concepts, and you're constantly relating it to yourself, all right, there's a sort of, I don't know if you even want to call it the beginner or the introductory tier to debate and discourse. And then when you're comfortable with yourself and you're at peace with whatever's happened in the past and whatever's happened to you, that doesn't mean you aren't fighting against certain norms or you have a point to prove politically, but you need to be able to separate your personal story and your
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote lived experience and emotions from the ideas being discussed. And once you've reached that level of consciousness, maybe then there's a second tier of discourse for if we want to take that sort of a model to universities or even podcasting, because I just can't. I don't think it doesn't help when you just insult people who are fragile when it comes to certain ideas or free speech. I think those people actually need help, and maybe they do need to be protected, and there needs to be a different realm of discussion and discourse for them, while everyone else can talk freely, or as freely as they think they're capable of talking.
Yeah. Well, what I learned from Jordan Peterson was when I was on the left, basically it all comes down to psychology, right?
Yeah.
And I remember him talking about people start when they're younger, they're more liberal, and that being conservative is something that happens as you get older. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, there's no way I'm going to become conservative, because in my head at that time, I had associated conservative with like
Racist.
not just racist, but like unempathetic, like uncaring, all of that kind of shit. And then I realized, because of psychology, political temperament is all comes down to openness and conscientiousness, right? And that's genetic for the most part. So people are born and they have what they see, what their values are determines their perspective of the world. So they can see the same fact from different perspectives.
I mean, I think there is a empathetic and open side to, I guess, what you could call American current conservatism and American liberalism, but then also a stricter and ordered and regimented side to it. So if you look at maybe the Christian right, they usually, well, they should be, you would think.
Yeah.
Christianity is all about love thy neighbor and
hmm
loving everyone. That's an uh, empathy centered ideology. I know it can also be bastardized and things like that.
Yeah.
But then you've got, I guess, more what you could call neoconservative right, or the nationalist right, which is very hardline, America first, or Australia first, and you know, we have to keep it pure, which I think is also a stereotype. I don't know how many people are actually like that. And then on the left, I suppose you have your more militant working class, pro working class, socialist left, which is not. It's supposedly empathetic, but it's also very combative. It's very, we need to fight for the workers. We need to stand up. I don't see that, and I don't immediately think, oh, empathy.
Yeah.
Whereas then there's the side of the left, which is very focused on compassion and pro-immigration, even to the detriment of just order within a society. And that, I suppose, is the more empathetic side to the... I think it's just a lot more complicated than just left, right. One is open, one is... I've definitely... Because Jonathan Haidt also talks about that sort of... discerning from the big five traits which political side you're likely to agree with. But I just think there's something in in all ideologies that fulfills any array or permutation of those traits within the individual. And I think it's just a lot more complex than that. But I actually went the other way, funnily enough. Economically, I was actually quite right wing. Almost from an edgy in high school, I was like, yeah, I'm an edgy right wing guy. And then I just there was a preconceived ideology that I just adhered to. But then I've started to think a bit more critically, and I wouldn't call myself. I have, and it's not that I'm a centrist either, because I'm not on the center on every issue. But on some things, I'm very left wing, and on some things, I'm a lot more right wing. You know, I do think socializing various services is conducive to a harmonious society, and even though it may not be the most economically efficient overall, when you take into account other factors such as such as social harmony being the big one, and just other social costs, then things like socialized healthcare, socialized education, infrastructure, these sorts of things, which are, left-wing ideas. I agree with.
Yeah.
However, the culture associated with education, because it's been so, the need to be compassionate has gone to an extent that is now unhealthy.
Yeah.
I would adopt a bit more of a, well, you could almost say, I don't know if it would be a reactionary, but I'd think about transforming the actual culture around education. So economically, I would say, yeah, let's socialize it. Let's make sure every child, no matter what their economic means, gets access to a
Education.
to a quality education.
Yeah.
But let's think about what we're actually teaching the kids.
Exactly.
It's not just about pouring money into it. You can do that as much as you want. If the child doesn't value education and doesn't strive to learn and be the best they can be, well, then they can be in a multi-million-dollar school and nothing will happen.
Yeah, education I think is the system is very screwed up these days for a number of reasons. For one, for the most part it's been changing lately, but for the most part it's basically used to generate like factory workers, and that's like how the whole school system is set up, and so they don't really encourage people to think outside the box as much as they should.
That's true, but I think you got to actually. Jordan and I talked about this in the podcast coming out this Sunday. You got to toe a fine line between instilling values of discipline and order and adhering to the coursework set out for you, because those are important skills to have for any individual, but also the ability to think critically and be creative. And sometimes they contradict. So when you are instilling strictness, discipline, order, that stifles creativity. But when in trying to instill a sense of creativity, that can often go against something like discipline and studying in a regimented way and order. So you have to find the right balance where someone can be both hardworking, conscientious, disciplined, but also creative.
Yeah.
And think abstractly and think differently. That's the key. That's the $1 million question. $1 trillion question, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there when you said balance. I think that's essentially the solution to basically every problem, because you have to find a compromise, and you need order and chaos left and right. They need each other. It's all about balance, I believe.
Yeah, you got to find the best version of every argument and of every ideology, and I mean, even I'm guilty of doing that sometimes, and it's fun. Well, because as a comedian, you sometimes do have to mock ideas and find their the flaws in their overarching narrative. But then when you're discussing on a podcast that isn't necessarily comedic, that is not fruitful, and you're strawmanning then. So to get better at, maybe that's something I think need to work on, stepping effectively between those two mindsets. So when I'm comedian Neel, finding the flaws in different ideas and different groups and people. Not necessarily the flaws, but the foibles, if you will. Yeah. And then when I'm podcast Neel, finding the best version of everyone and everyone's ideas and ideologies and politics.
And the only way you'll really get that is through discourse and freedom of speech, because you won't be exposed to the information you need to be.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about something which some might deem controversial.
Okay.
What's happening with masculinity and femininity these days?
Give me a more specific question.
Okay, so let's start with all the talk about toxic masculinity, right? But it's only a problem when it's in men. If you know what I mean. And basically, I'd say the bigger war under the surface is against femininity.
Interesting.
I think that's what. I think that's the underlying thing. There's a war on femininity because you see women becoming more masculine these days, and they're trying to make men more feminine. And I think that they're trying to usurp the patriarchy, right? And they believe it's because of the masculine traits. So they're trying to switch the traits to get on top.
Yeah, I can see some evidence of that. I think it's a lot more complex as well, like with everything though. But
of course, it's one.
first of all,
aspect.
I would say that due to our environment now, there's less of a need for men to be what you would call traditionally masculine. Most of us aren't working out on the field every day.
Mhm.
There's a generous social safety net. We don't have to go to war. We don't have to build things in the way we used to, unless, well, I mean, some people still do, if
Yeah.
their job is still based on physical labor. So there's less of a societal requirement to be masculine.
Mhm.
It depends how you define toxic masculinity, because are you saying all masculinity is toxic, or are you saying there are toxic elements to masculinity? And if you're saying all masculinity is toxic, that is reductive
Definitely.
and ideological
Yeah.
and based on, I think, a lot of resentment.
Would you say that's where third and fourth wave feminism falls under? All masculinity is evil. That's what I've seen. From what I've seen.
Well, there's a lot of, I guess, adherence to those ideas that may not know the literature to its fullest extent.
Mm.
Not that I do either.
Yeah.
But what I've realized is a lot of, in this mass media and social media world, there's a lot of very provocative statements that are said without people actually meaning that. So women will say things like, I hate all men and masculinity is toxic. And when you really ask them, do you hate all men? They'll say no.
Yeah.
It's just a stupid thing to say.
Yeah.
And think something like defund the police. You hear something like that and you think, for God's sakes, are you insane?
Yeah.
And then you actually talk to people, oh, no, we just want to reform the police. But reform the police doesn't generate the same buzz and controversy. And to sort of gain attention in this world, you need those two things. But is there a war on masculinity?
No, I think it's a war on men rather than masculinity.
To Steelman, the opposing view, it would be we want men to be better, but it's all this stuff is so subjective because it doesn't take into account our inherent biology and something like sexual selection. And sexual selection is advantageous towards men who exhibit some level of traditionally masculine traits.
Yep.
And if we talk about things like leadership, self-assuredness, confidence without being domineering.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a difference between suppressing your emotions and being in control of your emotions and having a healthy outlet for your emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and not letting your emotions dictate your, well, we all let our emotions. We're emotional creatures at the end of the day, but there's a way to still utilize your rational thought in a way that gives you a healthy outlet for your emotions without it taking over your life. Those seem to be very admirable, virtuous, great traits to have. And I don't even think those are good traits just for men to have.
Yeah.
Those are probably good for women to have too.
Definitely.
So something like masculinity is just such a nebulous concept. And for different people, it means very different things. So I think now what most people, I've said this on so many podcasts, like what the hell does it actually mean? I think when most people say something like toxic masculinity, they talk about this sort of frat boy, stereotypically jockey culture. Oh, yeah, fuck, how many chicks did you root last night? Yeah, just fuck her and never call her back. That kind of general idea.
Yeah.
And it's just this idea that men are like that. And yeah, some are, but a lot of them may be expressing that sort of a sentiment in a very tongue-in-cheek way. But then the idea is that even if you are joking about things like that, it sets the precedent that it's okay to disrespect women. And all of these things are so, they're just very subjective and based on what certain people find uncomfortable, because there'll be so much disagreement among women about what jokes are inappropriate, what is harassment, what is sexism.
Yeah.
So it's just, I think a lot of it comes down to and is predicated on the idea that humans are essentially a blank slate. So wherever there is any disparity in a given economic system, there must be discrimination within that system.
Mm-hmm.
So because men still wield a lot of economic power and political power and tend to have the very high paying jobs, okay, the system, there is discrimination then.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't take into account myriad other factors.
Yeah.
And that's the main concern there. There probably is still a lot of sexism.
Mm.
That's something to fight against. But when you assume that all of the disparities between men and women are caused purely because of sexism, well, then you are going down a dangerous path, I think.
Yeah.
And that's where it's this overcorrection where anything that we think may be disrespectful and makes women uncomfortable needs to be eradicated.
Yeah.
And
I mean, they're just people too, right? We're all people.
yeah, we're all humans at the end of the day as well. But there are differences. Let's not tiptoe around that. And it's funny that, you know, a huge sentiment that is being leveled towards men is do not tell women how to act. I don't want to be the ideal version that you want me to be. Whereas now it feels like we're supposed to become this ideal version that women want us to be.
Yeah.
Now the argument against that is like, no, we just want you to not commit assault and things like that. But of course, like, everyone's on the same page about that. No one wants anyone to ever be assaulted. Everyone is on the same page. What we differ in is what is the root cause of that problem? Is it a culture of disrespect that has permeated throughout Western civilization? Or is it that there are certain biological realities that mean men, and I'm not, it should always be punished.
Mm-hmm.
It should always be strictly punished. But is it something like robbery or murder where unfortunately there'll always be a certain level of this that occurs in society? And when you have these sentiments like, I teach men not to rape, like it's so simplistic and reductive. I don't see how. Sorry. There we go. I just don't really understand where that concept even came from, because no one's been taught how to rape. You know, I just, yes, men need to be held accountable. All these things. Like, no one is disagreeing with you there.
The people.
It's just I don't see how things like, okay, we need to get rid of every joke that a man makes about a woman because that's a symptom of disrespect towards women, or we need to men need to all be held accountable for the actions of a few. I can't see that how that is fruitful. I just can't, and it sets a really contradictory and strange sentiment that we're allowed to discriminate on some groups, but then on other groups where it's morally not, it's just not permissible to discriminate. It's very confusing to me. That's all I'll say.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, for everyone, I believe.
Yeah. No, I mean, and again, like everyone's on the same. 99% of people, 0.9, are on the same page. I have general faith in the goodwill of all men as well. That no one should be assaulted or anything like that.
Yeah.
We want to get rid of this, but when you keep broadening the definition to these surveys where you ask women, have you ever been assaulted, and that includes, have you ever been stared at for a prolonged amount of time? Well, how do you put, really, like, I mean, you got stared at too much. I mean, what do you want us to do? It's just, do you want me to then am I supposed to be held accountable for my mates who are staring at a girl too much and be like, hey, dude, you've stared at her for too long now. You got to stop. I just don't. I want to help. Like, it's like I want to help, but I just don't. None of my friends would ever. Well, fuck. God damn it, touch wood. But like, none of my friends would ever do anything horrible like that to a girl. So I can't. I don't know what to do. Like,
exactly.
It's these. You have to look at how they're measuring some of these things, and look, there are certain things like when a girl goes to a club and is getting groped, and that's bad.
Yeah.
Okay, how do we police something like that? The bouncers and things need to be. If a girl says to a bouncer, "Hey, he touched me," immediately kicked out. Well, yeah, I'm fine. We can do that. No one's that happens now at clubs and things anyway. We have a stronger HR presence about inappropriate behavior in the workforce and things like that. Look, all of that is good. No one's disagreeing with that, I guess, but it's just very confusing. I suppose if you are attracted to someone at a club, well, yeah, you don't go. I don't know. Maybe they need to have like classes for boys and girls in high school about how to actually interact with each other, because a lot of it's still the man who is pursuing. And when you're younger, you don't really know what you're doing, and you make mistakes. Now you can't say something like assault is a mistake, but fuck, any man who's tried to make out or escalate sexually with a woman that they perceive to be into them has sometimes overstepped, and then gone in, you be making out with someone, and then you try to go to whatever it is, second base or whatever, and she's like, oh, sorry, no, I don't want to do that. And you're like, okay, sorry. Like, but you're going to misstep in these situations. It can't be this perfect, robotic ordeal of, okay, I'm going to do this now. Do you consent to this? I'm going to do this now. Do you consent to this? I don't know. At the end of the day, man, fuck. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we'll go back to what you said a bit before. Bill Burr had a really good joke about that. He's one of my favorite comedians.
Just in case, you didn't get the memo, Evidently, just some people didn't get it. It's not okay to slam your wife's head into the cupboard drawers because she didn't dry the can opener off properly, It's gonna fucking rust, right? It's like wife beaters watching. Oh, fuck! Now I get it. Upsy-daisy, sweetheart. Here we go. There you go. Oh.
It's not like they don't know. They're just fucked up individuals who'll do it anyway. So just tarnishing the whole group based on those, it's not going to have any positive effect at all.
Yeah, you can't like simultaneously be like, all men suck, I hate all men. Oh, can you like, regulate all your friends' behavior so I feel comfortable? Well, I don't know. What do you want me to do? If you hate me, why should I do? I don't know. Of course, if a friend was like, oh yeah, look at her, she's fucking unconscious, I'm going to go do so. Well, like, fuck off. Don't do. Are you a fucking monster? Like, don't do that. But
you wouldn't be friends with those people anyway, hopefully.
No, exactly. I don't know. Who the fuck are these guys? I don't know. But then when the criticism leveled at our general view, which is that, well, don't tarnish the whole group with the same brush, is that, well, when you look at something like Muslims who commit terrorism, it's such a small percentage, and you look at any other unfairly stereotyped group, it's a very small percentage, whereas, 1 in 3 women experience, I don't know what, but they always say these statistics, but then you look into just a rudimentary look at these statistics, and they're very skewed, and they're biased to like point out the narrative that it is this pervasive problem, when, like I said, there's things like, have you ever felt uncomfortable because a man stared at you, or have you ever, been looked at in a way that made you uncomfortable? And it's like, well, how that's unfair to people who have experienced violence when you put things like that in there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, fuck, everyone's, well, look, no, I'm sure women have been stared at a lot more and things like that, but I just don't know how much is it actually our, you know what, I listened to this podcast the other day, and I wish everyone listened to it, because it was a guy interviewing this a woman who became a trans man and then transitioned back to a woman.
Okay.
And when she transitioned to a trans man,
Mm-hmm.
took on testosterone therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And she was talking about how, oh, I get it now because you take this testosterone, and she said, my vast emotional palette
Mm-hmm.
purely just became anger.
Oh.
And so she could only, he could then only express himself through, and she was saying, because I'm saying she because
Yeah.
then
she came
transitioned back. I was just horny all the time, constantly horny at everything.
Yeah.
And I thought, can people listen to this so they understand? This is not an excuse for men who commit atrocious acts where they hurt people, but it's a very different experience being male.
Yeah.
And if you want us to listen to the experience being female, which I do, I can't empathize with because I don't know what it's like, but look, if you're getting harassed and you're always, if it's, you feel unsafe when you catch an Uber, like that sucks. That really sucks. But just saying things like mention rape, like it's just, I think there's like a utopian streak in that sort of progressive left where like one day we can never have racism, never have sexism, never have anything bad, and everyone can just make the exact same amount of money, and we can all be just as beautiful and never have any shame, and everything is perfect. It's like, what fantasy land are you living in there?
Yeah.
Okay, that's never going to happen. We can aim towards something like that. But I think it's a lot of sort of fanciful utopian thinking.
Yeah, definitely. It's not really based in reality at all.
Yeah, and again, it's just such a tough conversation to have because again, like everyone's on the same page. Some would say, we need to actually restrict. It was the sexual revolution that's causing a lot more of this harassment and things. Whereas, back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the whole ethos of being a man and masculinity was we need to protect women.
Mm-hmm.
Women are the gentler sex who need to be protected, and that's almost what you're asking for now as well. Can you protect us? Can you look out for us? So it's just very confusing and convoluted, and I just don't. Those are my overall vent style opinions, I guess.
No.
I want to help. At the end of the day, I want to help. And look, it's true. Every man, if they do have a friend who, they think might be sketchy, or is too aggressive in the way he talks about women, and it comes across unhealthy, they should say something, and they should call that out. That's very fair. That's completely fair.
Yeah, definitely. I think I have an idea of how to help. It's quite out there, but we'll get to that later.
Sure.
But what I would say is, Jordan Peterson has mentioned. I know it's been coming up a lot, but he refers to Christ as the archetypical, perfect, androgynous human being. He referred to him as an androgynous because he integrated femininity as well. And so what I believe is that a good person, you shouldn't aim to be a good man or a good woman. Aim to be a good person, and what that means is integrating positive of masculinity and femininity. Because I believe masculinity is referred to as like logic, rationality, reason, right? It's how to do things.
Well, why do we need to group all those things into masculinity or femininity? Let's just say, okay, it's good to be logical, it's good to be rational.
I'm just sticking to the frameworks that I've already learned.
Sure. No, of course.
For example, masculinity is yang, femininity is yin. You need that balance and everything, like I mentioned before. So you find that balance, yin and yang, masculinity, femininity, and you have the best of both worlds. And that's how we'll make the world a better place, by becoming better ourselves, and that will radiate outwards. But when we can't forget about our own biological temperaments based on hormones and all of that, and then we can move this into sexual market value, dating, how that looks different for men and women, and masculinity, femininity, evolutionary biology, and all of that. What do you know about that?
In what sense?
Like hypergamy.
So that's the idea that women always want to date up, and from what I've read on evolutionary psychology and biology, hypergamy seems to be something that's espoused a lot in manosphere areas. Look, I think I don't think humans are value-seeking creatures at the end of the day, and this ideal, but also I think utopian fairy tale that when you love someone, you just love them unconditionally and you stick through thick and thin, and no matter what they become or who they become, you just have to stick with that person. That's an ideal. It is going against our nature,
Exactly.
both men and women.
Yeah.
And now that we've sort of taken away the cultural restrictions in upholding that ideal, we do see a lot more, divorces and hedonism. But some would say it's not a bad thing. Some would say people were trapped before. We got to find that right balance between order and chaos. Right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
you don't want people to feel so confined in an unhealthy relationship, but at the same time, do we need to enforce some degree of shame if people are treating their spouses indifferently or disrespectfully?
Yeah.
That's a big question, because you have to take into account current technology, society, the goals of the nation, what the culture values, the individual's rights, and then create a culture that, or sort of, mold a culture into the optimal standard of relational interplay between the sexes. So I think it just evolves naturally over time.
Yeah, well, from what I've seen, the proclivities of either gender, both genders, men and women tend to want different things, right? And women, I know it's a generalization, but statistically, they tend to go for men with more resources. That they're at the top of that dominance hierarchy, and men tend to value on a id level, basically youth and beauty and fertility and all of that, right? And I think what's happening, and it's actually very sad for me to see a lot of unhappy older women, because I have a feeling they're convincing themselves that what men want is what they want as well. So they strive, like they spend all their 20s, 30s, focusing on their career, which is fine. But when they get to that high end thing, they haven't spent the time they maybe should have to find someone before they reach that age, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's a sort of classic trope that talked about a lot again in the manosphere space. Yeah, I'm sure that does exist. What do you say though? Do you then, should the culture tell young women, oh, you'll only be happy if you find a man, because that's what they fought against for so long?
I know. There's evidence there's a growing number of women who are getting more and more unhappy.
That is true, yeah, but there's other factors that could be at play there. Look, you don't want to you don't want to find all your happiness and well-being through a relationship, and you don't want to find all your happiness and well-being through a career. And you have to find the balance.
Yeah.
That's it at the end of the day,
yeah. What do you look for?
What do I look for?
Yeah.
The biggest thing I find attractive is intelligence.
Yeah.
Because I like
discussing. You need intellectual discourse.
And I like someone who is humorous and is on my level with sense of humor, I guess. They don't have to have the exact same values as I do, per se, but be open. I like openness.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who's willing to. I think people who say I'm open and I'm liberal actually aren't now
Yeah.
at all. They're the
Yeah.
ones who are very closed-minded
Exactly.
and don't want to listen to what anyone else has to say. So I like people who, even if we disagree on certain things, are willing to hear out my point of view and find and hear the best possible version of my ideas.
Yeah.
But look, there's not like a list or anything that I need to check off. It's just
You just see
my
what
life.
happens.
Yeah, see
Yeah.
what happens. You always learn something from the people you date,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it's worthwhile trying different things and dating different people that you wouldn't have otherwise thought
Exactly.
you could have dated.
You never know what you'll find.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on meditation and spirituality?
Oh, I live by it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know about spirituality necessarily, but I really meditation's a daily. Well, I try to make it a daily practice for me.
Okay, because with meditation, it has a range of benefits. It has that intellectual benefit where it clears your mind and focuses you, but it also has, if you want to go on the spiritual side of things, go more esoteric, then you can raise your energy, and I know some people laugh at that. But we do have, I believe, electromagnetic fields, and raising our energy radiates outwards. And then if you, I sent to you Power versus Force the other day, and he talks about the different energy levels. And basically, it's can be scientifically proven through kinesiology. Your body reacts to energy, whether you know what it is or not. So I believe that's true. And have you heard of the Maharishi effect?
No, I haven't.
It refers specifically to transcendental meditation, but I believe it can apply to meditation in general. But basically, what that effect states is, if the square root of 1% of a population collectively meditate, it will change the magnetic field of that area and crime will decrease. And it's been proven in studies that it does work.
I've never heard of that. I'm not really into that. Really, the spiritual side of meditation as much. I just do classic mindfulness.
Yeah.
Try to do it every day or a few affirmations here and there. But I've definitely heard about things like that.
Yeah.
And that sounds great. If it can actually reduce the crime rate. But, no, I haven't really heard of anything like that before.
Yeah, so that's actually an experiment that I wanted to run to see if we could get as many people as possible to collectively meditate and see what happens.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it worked.
Huh?
And it worked?
No, I want to run it.
Oh, you want to do it?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
We'll start the Facebook group. That's something that there are a lot of people that would probably be into that, especially around the inner west area.
Yeah, because even if that benefit doesn't happen, they still get a range of other benefits through meditation, as you know. So they will make themselves better, become better versions of themselves. And I think, have you ever had an out-of-body experience through meditation?
No, I can't say I have.
I've only had it a couple of times, but basically you feel a sense of connectedness with everyone, and you kind of lose that illusion of separation. And I've come to that realization that spirituality is all about everyone being the one collective being. That collective consciousness you spoke of is actually one being. We're all the same, basically. Okay. And what separates us is our egos. And that's why when you become more spiritual and you have that love, you start radiating that love, because it's not exactly selfless, because you're just giving it back to yourself because they are you, right?
Okay.
So,
never had that realization yet, but I'll let you know if I get to that point. If I reach enlightenment.
It's a good thing to aim for.
Yeah, it is. It sounds like it is.
It is. Actually, let's finish off with some questions. I've got a few. Okay. So, one of them is from our old mate Raphael.
Okay.
Duffy. He says, "Why were you always so weird, and when did you start owning that?"
Was I always so weird? He's saying I am weird.
Well, yeah, that's Raphael for you.
Around high school, I'd say I definitely stood out. I was the class clown. I was out there. At times I was quite shy and withdrawn, but then I'd also be very vibrant and loud and trying to gain attention. So I'd say around high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure Raphael would love that answer. I got another question from my friend Lax.
Okay.
He says, society is at an interesting point at the moment. We are seeing more people rise in their level of consciousness and become aware of themselves and the world around them. However, this is still not the majority. What is your take on this spiritual evolution and how it affects our political, social, and economic climate?
I don't know. Are people aware of themselves more than... I suppose technology is actually what has broken people out of their realities because they're exposed to so many different ideas and thoughts and schools of political thought.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the ramifications for the next decades? Probably will be quite chaotic because there'll be a degraded sense of security people have within their given society because there'll be so much atomization and tribalism.
Yeah.
But it may settle down and there'll be new norms that come about. So we're currently in maybe a state of flux.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine it will then go down a path into just hellish chaos, but just different ideas that are popping up and different experiences and I suppose realities and consciousness, and then we'll conform again.
Yeah.
Because I think that's inherently what we
I think I have noticed a trend
yearn
myself that
for.
more people are waking up and finding consciousness because I put up a poll on my Instagram. I know that's a small sample size, but
Sure.
about religion, and basically more people are starting to believe that all religions have an underlying spiritual philosophy.
Mm.
So they are seeing that illusion of separation starting to like fall apart a bit. So I have noticed that trend. One more question. This is from Sarah. Why do men reject attractive women?
Why do men reject attractive women?
Yeah, she says it happens to her a lot.
We'd have to ask them. Sure, there's plenty of reasons.
But do you have any thoughts on why?
Maybe they have a girlfriend. Maybe they are not looking for anything at the time. Maybe they aren't attracted to that particular person.
Mm.
I don't think every man just wants to sleep with. Well, they may have the compulsion to have sex with 90% of the women they see, but there are other factors going on in their life. They can't just do that.
Yeah. I would say that looks aren't the only thing that count, right? So there have to be other things that need to be brought to the table. I also think there's a possibility that they're intimidated and they feel if they reject you first, they won't get rejected. That's a possibility.
Could be, yeah.
That's one option. Yeah, I think we answered that one. This is applying to both men and women, but why do people usually try to find the same person as themselves? In the sense that they don't go for the opposite?
Well, there's also the idea that opposites attract.
Exactly.
So there can be a big excitement factor that comes into play when you've found someone who may be quite different to you. Sexual attraction is very complex, and we don't know exactly where it comes from and why it exists. And there are certain patterns that occur with what and who we may be attracted to, but there's also underlying psychological, sometimes even trauma that can influence what we're attracted to, and the urge to seek out a partner that may offer similar traits to your opposite sex caregiver.
Oh, that's
There's all sorts of those. Yes. But sorry, what was why we're attracted to the same? Well,
familiarity.
Yeah, familiarity. I can imagine that's the main factor at play there?
I would say
Kinship.
kinship, yeah. Well, you have more things to share your life with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so you can experience life together
Absolutely.
in the same way. So I think that's why people look for someone similar.
100%.
But then at the same time, when it comes to opposites, I do personality readings for my tax clients
Okay.
just for fun. And when a couple comes in, I do it together. And so many times, more often than not, they actually were the exact opposite personality type
Yeah.
in terms of Myers-Briggs. So
Okay.
yeah, so that was
Can-
interesting because I didn't.
You can complement or you can sort of be the same, and
Yeah.
they both probably have advantages and disadvantages.
Exactly. So that's finding balance there in and of itself. All right, just the last few questions. What's
Sure.
your favorite TV show?
Can't go past The Simpsons, I think.
Yeah?
Yeah. Breaking Bad, the classics.
The classics?
Yeah.
Have you ever watched Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Nah.
I highly recommend you check
The
it out.
cartoon?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know a lot of people have this image that cartoons are just for kids, but this isn't just for kids. It'll actually teach you a lot. And I literally believe that if it was introduced in the school syllabus and every child learned the lessons it teaches, the world would be a better place. And I think adults could learn a lot from it too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's got like you like martial arts, you do taekwondo and boxing, right?
Yeah.
So basically, all the forms of bending in the show are based on a martial art, and they actually hired a specialist consultant.
Okay.
So it's got really good action. It's got comedy. It's got epic character arcs. I think you'd really like it. What would you say is your favorite author?
Well, the person Eliza and I.
Esther Perel?
Yeah. I feel like Esther Perel.
Yeah.
I just haven't got the two books right. Favorite authors. I just read everything. So many different things that I read though. Say Yuval Noah Harari, but that's just because he's just written that one book, Sapiens.
No, he's got one more after that.
He does. Sorry, but
Yeah.
like the Sapiens is the one that I really
Yeah.
like. I don't think I have a favorite author because I read a lot of non-fiction.
Yeah.
So it's just about the book.
Yeah. You're a gamer as well, but you don't, not so much anymore.
Not so much anymore.
No
No.
time, eh? Okay, I think I've run out of questions.
Okay.
And you got to go as well.
I
So I
definitely
don't want to.
gotta
I don't want to
choose,
keep you for much longer.
No, that's all good.
But thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for
Neel.
having me, man. It
Yeah.
was fun.
If you haven't already, you can subscribe to Neel's YouTube channel and follow him on social media. I'll put links in the description below. Follow me too if you as well while you're at it. And I'll catch you on the next one. See ya. If you'd like to support this podcast, support Neel, and help save the world just by doing your taxes, then go to paradise.net/contact and enter the hero code Neel. Link in description below. We provide tax and business services, SMSF auditing, and finance. A portion of our fees goes to charity, and we also plan to treat with every transaction. So become a citizen of Paradise today and save more than just taxes. The more of you there are, the more benefits we'll be able to bring you to make your lives easier and more enjoyable.